So we need to begin our work session. Everybody sounds excited.
Hey, Mr. Mayor, how you doing? Hey.
There you go. There you go, Counselor Gabriel. Counselor Gabriel, did you watch the basketball game last night?
I'm afraid I did.
Yeah, that was a tough one.
What's that?
I said that was a tough one, but I'm sure proud of that team.
Oh, yeah. To make it that far, no doubt.
And they were not, yep, that's right. And they weren't pushovers. They did very, very well.
Yep.
Exactly. UCLA is obviously a dynamite powerhouse of a team, so you know, there's a little intimidation factor going into that, but they came to play, and they did, and it was a good game.
Oh, yeah.
Great season, and they need to be recognized for it. I don't know that we're going to do any kind of resolution or proclamation or anything like that, but they should know that they have some fans on the city council and obviously all over.
Absolutely. You bet.
All right. I apologize. I had to talk about the basketball game for just a second. We have, as our first item for the work session tonight, somewhat of a separate item, which is a public hearing. And I'm going to ask the city clerk to give the notice of the public hearing, and we'll see if we have any comments or anyone from the community here to speak to it. Go ahead, city clerk. Thank you.
Notice is hereby given that between the 3rd day of January 2021 and the municipal date of the 16th day of February 2021, the following have filed applications for renewal of liquor license in the office of the city clerk of the city of Laramie, Wyoming, for the following described places and premises. Laramie Lanes Incorporated, High Plains Elevation LLC, Walmart Stores Incorporated, Hensley Property Holdings LLC, Coyote Land Incorporated, E&K Smith Enterprises, Big D Oil Company, the 307 Office LLC, Electra Property Holdings LLC, Safeway Stores 46 Incorporated, Sweet Melissa's Incorporated, Jazza Inc., Corner Pocket of Laramie Incorporated, WRCH Laramie LLC, Buckhorn Enterprises Incorporated, SDR LLC, AKME LLC, Ridley's Family Markets Incorporated, Wagon Wheel Incorporated, Gateway Fuels LLC, First Street Station Incorporated, Ranger Liquor Mart and Bar LLC, Northridge Liquors Incorporated, Yasau Inc., Crowbar and Grill LLC, Chalk and Cheese LLC, Restaurant Liquor Licenses, the New Mandarin Incorporated, Bernie's Mexican Restaurant LLC, Guerin Enterprises Incorporated, Australius Inc., Villas Inc., Bighorn Associates LC, Yellow Star Restaurants Incorporated, Anong's Thai Cuisine LLC, Nico Sushi and Japanese Food LLC, DNP Investments LLC, Jay's Prairie Rose Inc., Palermo's Italian Restaurant LLC, the Bistro LLC, Bar and Grill Liquor Licenses were Sherlock Investments LLC, Sushi Boat LLC, Shoal Reef LLC, RS Development LLC, Speed Goat Laramie LLC, Cask 307 LLC, Maria's Mexican Grill and Cantina LLC, microbrewery licenses are First Street Station Incorporated, Sherlock Investments LLC, Coal Creek Tap Incorporated, Bonds Brewing Company LLC, Club Limited Liquor Licenses include Laramie Moose Lodge number 309, BPO Elks Lodge number 582, Husted Pendleton Post number 14, Veterans of Foreign Wars Post number 2221, Fraternal Order of Eagles. The Golf Club liquor license includes Jacoby Golf Course. Resort liquor licenses include Timberline Hospitalities LLC and Hotel Investment Services GI Incorporated. Special retail malt beverage permits include the trustees of the University of Wyoming, and winery is the Great Untamed LLC. Notice is hereby given that on the 18th day of February 2021, the following applications for renewal of liquor license has been received in the office of the city clerk of the city of Laramie of Wyoming for the following described places and premises: Bar and Grill liquor license, Accomplice Brewing, or Accomplice Laramie LLC. Notice is hereby given that on the 23rd day of February 2021, the following have filed applications for renewal of liquor license in the office of the city clerk of the city of Laramie, Wyoming for the following described places and premises: AB Laramie, Wyoming, LLC. Public hearing to hear comments and protests relative to the renewal of these licenses will be held Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021 at 6 o'clock p.m. in council chambers of City Hall via Zoom webinar, meeting ID 895-3844-3864, passcode 357883. Licenses will be considered for renewal at the regular meeting of the City Council on Tuesday, April 6, 2021 at 6 o'clock p.m. in council chambers via Zoom webinar.
Thank you very much, City Clerk. That was a great deal of reading, and we appreciate it. And it is required, of course, that we go through all of those applicants for renewal, the full retail liquor license folks, the restaurant folks, and the bar and grill license renewals, the micro brewery renewals, and all of the other individuals that are covered under the liquor licensing laws and regulations. Do we have anyone joining us that wants to speak to the council, provide their views, input, or otherwise on this public hearing matter? City Clerk, I'm looking at participants, and I sure see some people there, but I don't see anyone raising their hand.
Mr. Mayor, I received no requests ahead of time, and I don't see any hands raised for public comments on the liquor license renewal.
Thank you, City Clerk. Members of council, seeing no one indicating with the hand raised through the Zoom program or notifying the City Clerk that they wish to speak on this public hearing, I will close the public hearing. Public hearing on the liquor license renewals is closed, and we will move on to the next item in our agenda for this evening, which is public comment on non-agenda items. Preference given to those who have signed up ahead of time. Total time limit for all public comments to be 30 minutes. City Clerk, did we have anyone that signed up ahead of time?
Mr. Mayor, the only request we received ahead of time was Jennifer Powers was letting you know that she's here to represent Main Street for later agenda items.
All right, great. And Ms. Powers, thank you for being here. We'll no doubt hear from you when the time comes. All right. I'm not seeing anyone else indicating that they want to speak. So we will move on, close the public comment period, and advance to the work session item and recognize Assistant City Manager Todd Fieser. Or Derek Keeney from our planning department, whoever's up.
Honorable Mayor, this is Todd Fieser. I was actually just going to defer that directly to Derek.
Mr. Keeney, thanks for being with us. It is your show.
Mayor and council, thank you. First off, City Clerk, were we going to show the presentation while we spoke? Does that work for you?
Yes, that works.
Okay. All right. Council, I'm going to go briefly through a short presentation regarding parklets. What really the purpose of this presentation is to make you aware of progress that planning staff has been working on in relationship to parklets and budget that we have set up to hopefully install a parklet this summer within somewhere within the downtown zoning district. And so what I'm going to do is just kind of bring you up to speed on what a parklet is, talk about some of the things that we've worked on, and then just get a little bit of feedback from the council as we move forward kind of in this progress, and to make sure that we're tracking at least as to what council hopes to see in terms of this initiative. So if you want to go to the next slide, Nancy. So a parklet, what is it? These are really just they're temporary installations within a parking space or possibly two parking spaces that create open space and create a pedestrian environment within an area that typically doesn't have these types of environments available to it. So they don't have typically parks right next to it. And it provides for a lot of different opportunities for people. So if you want to go to the next slide, Nancy. You know, these are just kind of a few basic examples, you know, like in this one here, we're seeing just a couple spaces taken up. Few things I'll point out, nothing too elaborate here. There's some basic tables, some seating, allows for people to congregate and enjoy the open area. You'll see kind of a transition between the sidewalk and into the parklet area just for safe movements and for ADA access. You want to go to the next slide there, Nancy? Here we have a very different version, but, you know, still providing for just general space for the public to be in kind of in that environment where most of the time we only have sidewalk space. You can go to the next slide. This one here, definitely way more elaborate, would require way more work, but also still kind of in line where with this parklet idea of people taking something and really creating space outside of their store. You know, with COVID, we've seen some of this, probably you've seen some of these in the news in terms of, you know, restaurants doing different things like yurts and all sorts of outdoor seating just to try to create more space. Kind of in the same lines, this is what you're seeing in maybe like this example, for instance. So if you want to go to the next slide, Nancy. Really, the reality with a parklet is it can be kind of whatever you want it to be. It can be very elaborate, but it also can be very simple. And really kind of what we're trying to shoot for here is just providing an additional place and space within an area that typically doesn't have that space for people to congregate, for people to use, for people to maybe wait for a friend or a family member to meet them downtown or before they go to a restaurant, or maybe just to enjoy the nice weather when we have those days in Laramie that we all just dream of. So if you go to the next slide, Nancy, I'm going to kind of talk a little bit in terms of parklets and kind of what they're trying to achieve. So one, most of the time that they're somehow socially interactive. They provide a way for people to congregate. They will provide a place for people to sit, just watch people coming down the street, things like that. Typically, they're pretty sustainable in terms of they can be moved around. They're usually not too elaborate, so not kind of like that last example, but just kind of showing you they're there just to provide some temporary space. And a lot of times they can fit with surroundings, but also sometimes they can be very different than what's around there. So if you go to the next slide, in Laramie, we do, though, need to think about seasonality of these. Sometimes a parklet doesn't work the best in the winter. Really, for us and the discussions that we've had internally with staff is we do probably want to see how it works through the summer. We definitely sometimes have those nice days later into the year, but we also want to be able to move these things. So when we have maybe, for instance, an event, snow event like we did last week, they're not in the area, they're not in the downtown when we're trying to move snow, trying to keep things out of the way. Also, too, a lot of times we can create these spaces so that there's not just constant use there. So for instance, sitting versus standing is sometimes considered. You know, we can create standing spaces where it's more temporary space. People aren't probably going to stay there very long, but still creates time and space for people to be within this area that typically doesn't have that. If you want to go to the next slide, you can get really creative with these parklets. You can start to create them into more some sort of multi-purpose space. You'll kind of see in the one picture, there's activities available, foosball and things like that. And this other one up on the top, you have like exercise equipment. This one down kind of in the bottom corner is, a combination of bike, and it allows you to power your cell phones and computers and things with the bikes. And we're just showing you this, just kind of give you this broad idea of what people are doing across the country with parklets. They're really being creative. They're helping engage that street and the sidewalk space and the stores that are right next to it, and kind of a cohesive space and area that allows for those pedestrians to stay and be around and hang around. If you go to the next slide, to be clear, these parklets are found in the public right-of-way, so they're found usually like in a parking space area or in maybe an unused space. We also can see these parklets being located in places that are sometimes sponsored by businesses. The ones that we're talking about tonight are ones that we are working in conjunction with Laramie Main Street to put in, and it would be one parklet. In the future, we would hope that maybe businesses or other people may consider these as an option, maybe a way to create something interesting within our community. If you want to go to the next slide, Nancy. I've kind of mentioned, these spaces create gathering space. They also are noted in increasing kind of what we call the building footprint of an area next to a business. A lot of times you'll see these situated maybe outside of like an ice cream store, or maybe outside of a business like that has books, for instance, so people could maybe read once they purchase a book. So you'll see that kind of sometimes that co-relationship between the space that's being provided and maybe the business nearby. If you go to the next slide, Nancy. As I noted, it does add additional kind of what we call green space or open space or non-vehicular space, really, in some cases, because sometimes there's nothing green in them. A lot of times this provides a location to add street furniture. And generally what we find is they do provide some aesthetic appeal and engages the pedestrian and maybe vehicles driving by like, oh, there's something interesting here. What's going on here? It's different than just the normal cars that they would expect to see in a parking space. If you would go to the next slide, Nancy. So there's actually a lot of information out there too as well that supports parklets just truly from an economic standpoint. The graphs on the side there are actually some graphs from San Francisco installation of parklets showing increase in retail sales and things. What you'll find is generally when you start looking at things, you start to see an increase in retail sales. It creates more activity on the street, which then has what we call that ripple effect of people patronizing businesses. And it really doesn't matter what kind of business you're talking about. It just creates that interest within the downtown or within that area where you put that parklet, which is what we're trying to create. And what I would say is it's very similar to the Hollyhock project that we did last summer, except on a little bit smaller scale. And what it would allow us to do is it would allow us to move it around because they are mobile, but would also allow us to see the successes of, for instance, the Hollyhock project in other locations in the downtown that maybe could use that spark or could use some of that extra interest. If you can go to the next slide, Nancy. Things, that we're trying to look for is, we do know that these things increase foot traffic. It allows for the pedestrians and people to linger longer. If they're lingering, they may stick around for dinner. They may decide, oh, hey, I need to go pick up a card at the store, or, oh, I needed this item from a different store. And it allows people to, go into those stores and continue to patronize them. Does create for some overflow space, especially during those days when, you know, things are busy. Maybe the benches are taken up. Maybe there's activities or other events going on. It provides for just good visual appeal. It shows that something else is going on. And it just provides new options just for people to just spend time within the district. If you could go to the next slide. With parklets, they do come with some challenges and just some thoughts that have to be considered in terms of what we have to be prepared for when we do these things. Is we still have codes to follow. There are things such as ADA compliance. So if you think about a parklet being installed within a parking space, especially where there's a curb, you can't step down into those spaces. So you sometimes have to provide a transition or ramps or things like that, depending upon the style and design. For us in Laramie, we definitely have considered the Wyoming weather. We've got to be conscious of things like maintaining space for water to flow down the gutter, but also not allowing people just to step into the gutter. And, you know, things like removing parking spaces. You know, with one of these, you will lose a parking space or two. If you could go to the next slide, Nancy. Other things, you know, I kind of pointed out the drainage. You'll see that kind of grate. That's a pretty common way in which people address that, so that drainage continues, but, you know, allows for people to smoothly transition between sidewalks and into these parklets. If you go to, thank you. And then the next slide, you know, is one of the things that we really felt was important in discussing this design and this concept was being mobile. One, we want to be able to allow for these parklets to be moved and picked up and taken out, for instance, during, let's say, really inclement weather, or if we decide we do not want these during the winter. And then also, too, it allows us to use these in different locations within the downtown, for instance, with this first one, so that we can allow for, one, different businesses to maybe see the benefits of the parklet, but also to allow for people who really want these things in front of their properties to be able to request that and allow us to move it around reasonably. The next slide, please. So there are some things that we have taken into consideration. We've been working with our Public Works Department on this, as well as the City of Laramie's staff engaged a design group out of the University of Wyoming to help us with some of these concepts. And so there are some distances we need to be set back from corners within certain areas to make sure that cars can still see around, you know, at corners and properly use the street. We have to have some space between the parklet and the next parking space next to it. Diagonal spaces versus parallel spaces provide us different configurations and different ways in which we can design the parklet. And we have some basic dimensions that typically are needed in order just to accommodate an appropriate amount of space so that, you know, that they can be successful and that the parklets can provide what we're trying to achieve, which is this additional space within the downtown. If you could go to the next slide. In terms of budget, we do have $10,000 budgeted towards this effort. Once we knew that we did have this budget, we were able to acquire an additional $1,000 from the MUSER fund, as well as a placemaking grant that Laramie Main Street was able to obtain, which brings us up to $1,350 in terms of our a budgeted amount that we can use to install this first parklet. You'll also see in your budgets for future years, we'd like to try to accomplish 3 more parklets, so a total of 3 parklets that we'd be able to install within the community. And so, you know, first off, what we're hoping is really just this kind of first kicking off event of kind of this, from the success of the Hollyhock lot into this parklet here, kind of to show its benefits and to show how it could be something that's appealing and great for our community. And really with that, that's kind of the presentation I wanted to go over. I'd be happy to take any questions. I know that planner Matthew Cox is on the line, so he might be able to answer some questions as well. And then also too, I think Laramie Main Street is on the attendance list, may want to also note something. But with that, I can take any questions, and that's all I have for tonight.
All right, thank you, Mr. Tini. Council, let's ask our questions on this, if we have any, before we go to attendees, members of the public, or folks representing agencies that want to speak to it. I see Council Member Harrington. Anybody else after him? Council Member Harrington.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Derek, you said you had a group with, was it at the University of Wyoming, that is designing the actual parklet itself?
Mayor and Council, early on in the process, we engaged a class at the University of Wyoming just to help us work through just generic design concepts. The parklet that we are proposing for this summer isn't designed. We would go out for a normal RFP and allow for people to submit their proposals and ideas, and we would go through those and vet those. And so it's not designed yet. We don't know what it's going to look like, and that's kind of going to be up to the person that applies for and wants to build this thing and design it. So we're hoping for engaging and fun and interesting ideas for our first parklet, hopefully.
Great. Yeah, and actually, you took that. If I could, Mr. Mayor, you took that sort of to the. I was going to have a follow-up question about if we could engage the public in the design process in any way, but it sounds like that's built in. Yeah, that's great news. I think this is a really exciting way to use space. I mean, these placemaking projects are significant for the vibrancy of our downtown. So I think this is a great idea. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Harrington. Other questions for Mr. Tini? Councilmember Gabriel.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Derek. Great presentation. I really like the idea. Are you looking at a specific location now, or is that going to be coming in the future? Maybe some 2 or 3 different areas that might be a possibility. Just kind of curious what you're looking at for downtown.
Mayor and Council, kind of our hope is that once we get this moving forward and we have some idea related to the potential designs that we're going to be looking at, that will help us in terms of potential locations. Because if you look at a space that has, like, for instance, angled parking versus parallel parking, they're 2 different kind of styles. So one, that will drive some of the location. And then secondarily, what our hope is to do is we're going to be figuring out where we might want these, and then reaching out to those business owners that are nearby. Because what we do want to make sure is that if we're going to put one of these in front of like a business, that they're supportive of that. We want this to be something that's beneficial. And so that's what we're going to do, is try to engage that. And I think what we hope to see after once it's put in the first location, that others request for it to be put in front of their sites and their businesses. And that's the key of that mobility. We want to be able to move it around so that it can be used in multiple locations. We also want to know if, for instance, let's say we put it in a location and it doesn't work very well, we want to be able to move it and still utilize that construction and what we've done to really work for maybe a different location if we find out that it might not be in a great location. So.
You took care of all my questions. Thank you.
Councilmember Schuster, and then I'll go to the Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I noticed that in some of the pictures, a beverage was being served. So I'm just wondering, will we have to pass that ordinance that we had last year about open container downtown to make this work, or do you think this will be just fine with no alcohol items on the parks?
Mayor and Council, I think that's a great question. I think first off, I think you guys are going to be talking maybe some of that later this evening. But yeah, I think that this works no matter what is considered. So one thing to point out, these parklets are not business related. They may be outside of a business, but it doesn't mean that we're going to see a restaurant serving food to these spaces. If someone picks up food and goes out there and eats, do we care? No. In terms of drinking something, if it's obviously non-alcoholic, you could go do that today, and we're fine with that. If the council chooses, like we had last summer, some sort of open container process, the serving of alcohol, I think, is a very different thing versus whether it's permitted within the downtown. But the intent is this doesn't necessarily have to have that as a component of this to be successful. Like I said, you'll see these a lot of times, maybe outside of like an ice cream shop or something. I mean, having a scoop of ice cream out in the parklet is really what we're trying to do, is create that pedestrian environment where people are out there doing their thing and enjoying that space. So.
Thank you, Mr. Cheney. Anything else, Councilmember Schuster? Vice Mayor Pierce?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Are we, Derek, are we looking specifically at downtown? And the reason I ask this question is, some meetings ago, we were told that our parking lots are too big at certain locations and businesses. And I'm just wondering if, short of the alcohol issue, could something like this be expanded?
So this first parklet, we are looking at being kind of within that downtown area. We think that that's the most successful location for one of these to start out with, to kind of try to gain interest and to see how successful it will be. I think that in the future, whether these are found in other locations in the community, it would follow the exact same process. There's still some permitting that goes through our engineering department for obstructing the right of way of what we call it. And so these definitely could be incorporated elsewhere. Now, when you start talking about like within private parking areas and things like that, I think for sure that that's definitely a logical extension of taking space that maybe is underutilized, or maybe, let's say, a parking lot that's not always full, and creating space similar to like what we're doing at the Hollyhock Commons in another space. And so I think that it's a logical progression that we might see. And we do hope that this spurs interest from the private side of things, business owners or developers or anyone else really, to maybe think about this as a concept and come to us and find out if it's possible, whether it's on their property or in front of their property, or maybe in some space that I don't even know about right now, or I can't think of at the moment. So that's our hope.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember O'Doherty?
I just want to say I've gotten to take advantage of parklets down in Colorado when I visit my daughter, and it's just really pleasant, and we have the most glorious summers of anywhere. So I think, and I eat a lot of meals downtown, and sometimes the benches are full. So I would definitely take advantage of this. I hope it's a gathering thing and not a linear thing, so that you can hang out with people. Thanks.
Thank you. Council members, other questions for Mr. Cheney? Councilmember Cumby, and then I'll go over to Councilmember Gabriel.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm just wondering if you've engaged with downtown merchants yet to assess receptivity, get feedback, or is it in the early stages?
Mayor and council. So at this point, it's pretty early on in the stages of, initiation of that. Through Laramie Main Street, there has been talk about parklets in the past. And so I think it's something that I'm going to say people are generally receptive to. As I was talking about with the question earlier, as we get a little bit further on, I think it's the key for us is before we put one of these in, we're going to be engaging the businesses right there directly in that space to try to make sure that we're putting this first one in a place where people want it versus not. And I think that that's going to be really key.
Thank you. Councilmember Gabriel, did I see that you had a hand up? No, you're good. All right, my mistake. Councilmember Stelter.
Thank you. This isn't a question, just a comment. I was in Fort Collins like a month and a half ago. It was freezing outside, and I was really impressed by how many businesses had come up with this sort of concept outside and, you know, had little fire pits or like those towers or whatever. And it was really cool to see all the people gathering outside, especially with COVID when you can't be inside. It still seemed really lively and you can still hang out. So I think this is really cool, and it doesn't necessarily have to be seasonal. Thanks.
Cannot resist making a comment about people may want to be smoking outside. Who knows what? Mr. Tini, I have a question, and that is in your conceptualization of these parklets and in this discussion, it seems like your presentation showed us that there could only be so many of these in so many spots and sidewalks. You couldn't have too many of these. For instance, if we were on a block and every business wanted to have something like this in front of their business, that's not going to work. So how are we going to, become very popular, decide who might be able to host a parklet and who might not?
Mayor and council, so I guess I would answer that first with, I hope I have that problem and that I have to start to figure out with our council how we need to deal with private investment in our downtown with too many parklets. I mean, I'm dead serious with that. You know, I think with this first one, I think we're definitely not going to hit that threshold. I think that will be something that we would have to be conscious of. You know, through the permitting process of what we would need to do is we work with our public works department first off, just so that making sure the council kind of remembers that from my earlier portion of my presentation, is that we work with them, one, to make sure that we're putting these in safely. But number two, we are going to be looking at, you know, how many have we got? There could be requests for other things. For instance, let's say construction is going in the downtown and someone needs to put something in the right of way or block spaces off because of fencing, maybe because they're working on a building and don't want things falling on somebody. They will be working with our public works department to ensure, you know, safety measures. That may just simply eliminate the ability to put a parklet on a block or in a certain area one summer or 2 summers. And that's why we have that kind of cross departmental review and looking at these projects, because we do have to be thoughtful of making sure. And, you know, if we get to the point where we're seeing a lot of these, we may have to look at how do we restrict a number of parklets and what are we okay with. But I mean, for right now, I think that even if we do 3 over the next few years, if we receive that type of a budget, you know, I think we'll then have to maybe address that in a few years. But for right now, I don't think that that's probably a concern. And I don't have an answer that we would, you know, what the threshold or what the number is.
Thank you, Mr. Tini, for turning that cart around so the horse was back in front. And let me try to get back behind my skis. Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you for the second time, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Tini, I think maybe following up on Councilor Stalder's point of being in Fort Collins and seeing them in front of businesses, and then sort of the question the mayor just asked, made me curious if there is private investment in a parklet. A brewery wants to put one in front of their shop or something like that. Do those remain public spaces, or do those become sort of proprietary and sort of an extension of the business?
Mayor and council, for right now, we're hoping that the intent of these are to be completely public. They're not owned by one business or anything. Like we said earlier, sometimes you'll see business in other communities, business sponsor these. So they say, hey, you know, we like this concept, we like this idea, we're willing to invest in it because it creates more public space for pedestrians and creates a better environment. But really the intent is that this is public because it's on public property. Remember, this is still within our right of way. This is still not private property. Now, Obviously, going to Councilmember Pierce's kind of logical progression of we could start seeing these potentially, or this kind of concept in a private space possibly, and then that might be a little bit different. But I would say the intent is we don't want these to be privatized, because what we want these to be is open to the public, open for anybody to use, whether you're, like I said, eating ice cream, reading a book, or just want a place to sit down.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You bet. All right. Any other questions for Mr. Tini on this topic? Do we have anyone from the attendees that wants to speak? I see a hand up, and I think we had someone signed up ahead of time. Is that correct, City Clerk?
Mr. Mayor, we did have Jennifer Powers.
Okay, I'm going to recognize Jennifer Powers, and then I will go to hands and the attendees.
Hello, Honorable Mayor and City Council. I'm Jennifer Power. I'm the Communications Coordinator for Laramie Main Street. And I just want to thank you all for taking time to learn more about parklets. Derek did a great job explaining all the different benefits that we can see from a project like this. And I just wanted to express our support in the project and hope that we can get one started for this summer and see where the program goes from there. And of course, we're here to help with business engagement and things as we move forward through the project.
That's great. Thank you very much for being here, Ms. Powers. Ms. Power, I apologize. Do we have any questions for our Main Street folks? Just about any thoughts they might have or additional input that they might have? Okay, we appreciate that. I think there's going to be more that we hear, and there'll be more feedback from downtown business owners, members of this community, and it will be an interesting conversation, see how people want to be creative and take different approaches to this. I hope we do get some interest in this, and I hope it is successful. Thanks for being here. I'm going to do attendees, and I know we have one hand up, and I'm going to recognize Mr. Glass. Mr. Glass, you have the floor. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I just wanted to point out that while the lobbyists of Laramie Main Street who do not represent us and have not communicated with us, haven't engaged with the public at all about this. Downtown has a parking crisis, and it seems as if, it seems that Laramie Main Street and the city staff keep on trying to invent new ways to make that crisis worse. I urge you very strongly that if you go ahead with anything like this, that you use spaces other than parking spaces for this project, because we simply can't afford to lose any more. We already have too little parking downtown. Fort Collins was mentioned. Well, Fort Collins has built public parking garages. It has diagonal parking down the middle of streets. It doesn't have Laramie's parking crisis. We really need to be conscious of the downtown environment if we want it to be a place where people can come to enjoy these things at all, where they can shop, where they can work, where they can live, that you not impact parking any further. So please take this into consideration. And also, please instruct your staff and instruct Laramie Main Street to actually engage with us, because we were blindsided by this. We had no idea until this came up on your agenda for this session that anything like this was being planned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glass. And, for what it's worth, other than on paper, this is the first the council has heard of this, but I will ask Mr. Tini just a quick question, which is that we're very much in the early stages of this, and there's still a lot more opportunity for discussion and planning. Is that correct, Mr. Tini? You can just give me a thumbs up if you don't want to turn the mic on.
Mayor and council, there will be, as we start to move forward with this, what our plan is, like I mentioned earlier, is we'll start trying to engage in terms of finding someone who wants to do this. We have to find someone who actually wants to build one of these. And as we start to work with those people to figure out design, that's when we're going to start to figure out where we need one of these and where we want one of these. And that's where we're going to see that direct engagement with those business owners and the people in those areas about the installation of the parklet. And like I said, I think after that and after people see this, I think we're going to have people requesting us to put this in front of their spaces and in their areas. And that's what, you know, our hope is after that first time, that we kind of have maybe an ongoing list, and we can move it around maybe every month or every month and a half, and really try to utilize different spaces throughout the community. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I hope that this kind of spurs on maybe other parklets and maybe other locations even within the community.
Thank you, Mr. T. And I think we'll hear a variety of input about this from folks, and that not everyone will love this idea maybe, and we'll hear more about it. But I think it's safe to say that the city won't impose a parklet anywhere where it isn't wanted. And I don't think we need to worry about any danger of that, but there certainly will be opportunity for feedback, discussion, and we'll try as hard as we can to carefully plan the location of these. They're by their nature not a permanent installation, it seems. That's some security for people that may have some skepticism about this proposal. Anybody else from our attendees? Always welcome. I see two folks, and I don't know who raised their hands in order, so I'm going to go alphabetically and hope that folks will forgive me. Well, one hand just, they've been allowed into the room. Yes, thank you. Laura McDermott, welcome to the City Council. Sorry, I'm bumbling around trying to figure out who I'm talking to. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. This is Laura McDermott. I'm the Executive Director of the Laramie Public Art Coalition. And I just wanted to say how exciting I think it is that the city is considering and moving in the direction of creating parklets, which can be a really great and cheap and effective way to build community, and also a really excellent way to engage with artists as well, who could potentially be a part of a design team or come up with a great aesthetic plan for parklets and help our community, build that pride of place. And yeah, so I just wanted to say that I am jazzed and support this initiative and would be happy to help with through LPAC to spread the word for your requests for proposals and help engage artists in this activity as well. I think something that, as I was sort of researching parklets, that I came across that I thought was really wonderful and sort of relates to this idea of, parking spots, is the Chicago Department of Transportation actually calls parklets people spots. And I think that's really lovely because ultimately a city is about the people, right? And so creating these opportunities for people to gather and these third spaces really increases the livability of our community. So thank you so much for letting me chat.
I appreciate it. And I'm going to ask you to stick around for just a second because you are a representative of a partner agency, just in case people may have some input they want to provide or ask a question. And I'll just give you a double thumbs up and thanks, because once again, this public art director, employee of that nonprofit agency came here about a year ago and has been with Laramie and our community in the middle of all this chaos and has really just hit the ground running and not stopped. So we really appreciate it. Any questions for Laura McDermott? I see Mr. Tini here. Go ahead.
Mayor and Council, I just want to echo what Laura had to say, because I kind of in trying to keep my presentation brief, I think I was remiss. And, parklets provide a great opportunity for artists to engage in the community. And, I think as we move forward with something like this, I think you often see artists doing these types of projects because they the construction components are not very complicated often, but often they are right up an artist's alley in terms of what they like to do and how they like to engage the public. And so sometimes what we get a lot of times is that secondary benefit of creating a public space, but also creating an art piece and creating something that's engaging. And so, I think I'm not doing it self-justice if I don't support Laura and what she's saying too, and just making sure that I think it's something that these two things align. And when we can make projects align with other outside agencies and groups, we're doing a lot of times the right thing, which is good. So.
Thank you, Derek. Yes, art and public planning, a sensible duo and matchup for a city to be listening to. All right. Well, always important to have Laramie Public Art represented in discussions where projects are going to be relevant. So we thank you for joining us. Thank you for those extra points, Mr. Tini. Anybody else, any questions before we go to other members of the public or perhaps representatives of agencies? Not seeing any. Okay. Thank you. I see that Judy Snoke has raised her hand. Welcome. Good to see you here on Zoom. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'd much prefer to be in person with all of you. You're doing a great job with this, Derek. I think this is and company. I think this is a spectacular, innovative idea, well worth taking time to explore and to see whether or not it's viable. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Any other hands up for input on this? Appreciate everyone joining us tonight, taking time out of their evening to provide public comment to the City Council on projects like this and any other matters. It's important for us to hear. I don't see anybody else with a hand raised on this item. Okay. Any other questions or comments about this? I see the city clerk looking for my attention.
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to make a quick comment because it's been brought up a couple of times. If anything alcohol related were to come up with the parklets, the council would be taking further action. So I just wanted to reaffirm that you would see something on your agenda.
Thank you, City Clerk. That's a very solid point. Any kind of special permit period or area that might allow for open container exceptions and things of that nature would go before the City Council. The City Clerk would review it for applicability of state and local laws and regulations, and the City Council would consider it in some type of application process. Point worth addressing. All right, folks. Anything else on the parklet discussion? Been interesting. We look forward to hearing more about it. Okay. All right. Yep. Thank you. Okay. Let's get on with it. The next item for the work session tonight is a investment grade audit presentation of findings by Honeywell International. Hopefully that rings a bell or shakes a tambourine. It seems like 1,000 years ago the last time we talked about that, but I think the Assistant City Manager will be able to refresh our memories. Welcome.
Honorable Mayor, City Council, thanks for having us. If I refresh your memories, in June of 2019, the City of Laramie entered into a professional services agreement with the Honeywell International for an infrastructure renewal program. We started off with two tasks. Task one was an IGA for general fund facilities and buildings. That's an investment grade audit. Task two was an investment grade audit for the water treatment system. When we talk about an investment grade audit, just to add a little bit of information, it's about looking at the functional systems around buildings that are, you're testing what the investment versus the expense of that item is. So we're looking at what the investment of replacing a rooftop unit versus the expense of replacing that rooftop unit and the savings and how it could work out to be to our benefit to do that improvement. Jason Randall's here from Honeywell International. He's an account manager, and he's going to give you a full presentation that Nancy Bartholomew will pull up. So, Jason, do you want to take a minute and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Todd. You guys hear me okay?
Hi, Jason. We can hear you very well. At least I can. I'm not seeing anybody saying they can't. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
All righty. Well, again, my name is Jason Randall with Honeywell, and I appreciate the opportunity to kind of run through this presentation for Mr. Mayor and the rest of the City Council there. We had given this presentation back in June of 2020 to members of the city staff, so I haven't changed a whole lot and haven't really visited this project in a while, so I'll just kind of run through this and just open it up for questions. So Nancy, if you want to go to the next item. Okay. So just a quick agenda. We'll kind of run through at a high level the project financials. I think members of city staff have a copy of the full IGA that we delivered to the city. And so hopefully, you know, if any of the city council members are interested in that, they can get that copy from Todd, or Malia, I believe, has a copy as well. We'll also kind of discuss some of our high level findings from the IGA. And again, some of the high level life cycle analysis that we conducted as well. The project value to the city, and then we'll open it up for questions. So next slide. So again, Todd kind of touched on this a little bit, but the idea of an energy performance contract is that, you know, a company like Honeywell or Johnson Controls, you know, there's several entities out there that do these projects and have been doing them for over 40 years. They will go into a city or, you know, like a military base, and they'll do an initial preliminary audit to get a high level analysis of where we can save the entity money through energy efficiency projects. And so those are called ECMs, or energy conservation measures. And then the benefit of an energy performance contract is you bundle as many of these ECMs together as you can, and then the entity, the energy performance contractor like Honeywell, implements those and does all the design and build and implementation of those ECMs, because at the end of the day, what we also offer is we guarantee those energy savings. So if we say, you know, if we're going to replace aeration blowers at the wastewater treatment plant, then we would then guarantee that those blowers have a certain savings that we calculate over the course of X amount of years, and we provide that guarantee. And part of that guarantee is, you know, we come back and do measurement and verification over a course of however many years the city would have wanted us to do so. So that's kind of trying to give a little perspective on the whole process. So if you want to go to the next slide. So when we were looking at both task 1 and task 2, and actually I can't remember, Todd, which one was which, but one dealt with the wastewater treatment plant and one dealt with the general fund buildings. And, you know, when you calculated the total amount of savings over a 30-year period, that's that $23 million number right there. Next slide. And so the investment costs is represented by that 15 million, and that would have been the investment in the design and implementation and M&V of those two tasks and all the ECMs under that. And again, just highlighting that we would have guaranteed those energy savings over the course of that time. Next slide. So this chart just shows you, you know, the blue bar represents kind of the cost of doing the project with Honeywell, and the red bar represents the cost of doing nothing. And that kind of delta that you see there is your kind of energy and operational savings for each ECM, and then all bundled together over the course of that 30 years. Next slide. So this is kind of just a rewind of where we were. The city issued out a RFP for doing infrastructure renewal, which is, you know, essentially an energy performance contract and completing the IGA. And so we began that in 2019 and then completed that and provided a report back to the city in June of 2020. And that last bullet, it just kind of, you know, when we do these projects in Colorado with the Colorado Energy Office, we're required to provide open book pricing. So it shows you percentages of the total cost for different items. So like, you know, design and engineering represents 7% of total project costs. And, you know, if we would have continued down this path with the city, we would have provided that open book pricing to the city throughout the project. Next slide. So just kind of some dates here again, presented the IGA or started the IGA in 2019. And then, you know, we were, as part of the IGA development, we were really trying to align ourselves with some of the goals that City Council had set out, because that's important to us and it's important to the city. We delivered that IGA in June of 2020, and those last three bullets did not occur, so those are moot at this point. So we can move on to the next slide. And as part of the IGA, and again, in trying to align with some of the goals for sustainability from the city council or past city councils, you know, we tried to put some measurements in there for carbon reduction and what we anticipated that we would see in terms of energy efficiency and energy conservation on this project. Next slide. Just quick little slide with Honeywell's background, and you know, again, like I said earlier, the energy performance contract world is kind of started in the 80s. A lot of cities really did this during the Recovery Act under the Obama administration. I wouldn't be surprised if you see a lot more cities across the nation doing this as, you know, stimulus money comes out in the current administration. But this whole concept of energy performance contracts really started with the federal government. Military bases use these quite a bit. And, you know, it's not for everybody, but typically it, you know, provides some good benefits for various entities. Next slide. So I don't know if we skipped a slide there, or that's okay. So these are the facilities that we evaluated when we did an initial evaluation and then came back through to do the investment grade audit. So we looked at all these buildings and facilities, and, on your right are some high level measures. Our IGA report has much more detailed information on the energy conservation measures, but, those are kind of a high level. And, for the general fund buildings, they're pretty typical. They're HVAC upgrades, building automation upgrades, lighting upgrades. There were some more unique ECMs at the wastewater treatment plant, but that's kind of what this slide shows for you guys. Next slide. This slide just kind of shows that, and I think Todd touched on this, that there's these ECMs, you're trying to identify, obviously, energy savings. There's also operational savings, and then there's kind of life expectancy. So if you're going to be replacing certain equipment anyway, and it has an energy savings, I mean, there's kind of multiple benefits for doing like a life expectancy analysis, so you can identify systems that might be obsolete. And then, of course, you're identifying things that lack efficiency as well. Next slide. So here's some pictures that we had taken during the investment grade audit process. Not super sexy stuff, no solar panels or anything like that. But, it does, when you replace some of this equipment, you will see energy savings. So next slide. And again, this is kind of a repeat of a previous slide of just kind of some of the proposed energy conservation measures. The first three kind of have to do with the wastewater treatment plant, and the bottom one's more focused on the general fund facilities. Next slide. So with the, pandemic, we did add some ECMs toward the end, and, Malia worked hard to try to get some money from some CARES Act. And so we did include some technologies that would improve indoor air quality at some of the city facilities, but unfortunately, the city did not get some of that grant funding for the CARES Act. And so, these never got implemented through Honeywell, at least. Next slide. So, this just kind of, again, and I've kind of touched on this. I think the main point is probably the second arrow where, as part of a energy performance type contract, we would guarantee the energy and operational savings for the project. We'd be the energy kind of general contractor for all the work. So you'd only have one person, one entity, Honeywell, to deal with for all of these improvements. And it's obviously got its fiscal and environmental carbon goals that are associated with it, and it makes improvements with both energy and operational savings going forward. Next slide. Again, this is just kind of a slide that we pulled from the IGA report that would show, how the carbon goals would be achieved through this project had we pursued it. So I think the last slide is just opening it up for questions. So Todd, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
Yeah. Honorable Mayor, if I can direct your attention. First off, I want to thank Jason for being here tonight. He is battling an injury, and I think we're recovering a little bit. So I'm pleased to have him here. But, you know, we did get through the audit report, and due to restrictions on the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, the city was required to bid out the services and not give open contract to Honeywell at the wastewater treatment plant. By the removal of that from the wastewater treatment plant, we ran into a little bit of cause and effect where the cash flow analysis wouldn't be able to provide, without those energy savings being attributed to the project, it wouldn't be able to fund itself. And Jason, you can correct me if I'm wrong in that statement about the funding, but you know, it was just impossible to make the meet the savings on the rest of the projects without including the wastewater treatment plant project as part of that. One of the other things that's probably changed dramatically over the past year is the cost of most of the HVAC item improvements, and you know, RTU units, makeup air units, anything that has to do with HVAC and air control has actually seen a little bit of a skyrocket here lately, I believe. And maybe Jason can provide some information related to that too. Jason?
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, with, you know, the pandemic that we're going through, I think we've internally at Honeywell with the things that we manufacture, and then other manufacturers have definitely seen some supply chain challenges during the pandemic. And then just to add on to what Todd mentioned earlier, you know, without the bulk of the energy consumption was happening out at the wastewater treatment plant. So without that savings, it really made it hard to make this project cash flow to the benefit of the city. So it didn't really make sense to go forward with just the general fund buildings.
Correct. And thank you, Jason. And through that, in talking with Malia and Brooks a little bit, the investment that was made out of the wastewater treatment towards this, we do feel that we actually received very good design project from Honeywell, and the wastewater treatment plant project has moved forward. And I think they may have just started construction here recently. And Brooks maybe can correct me if I'm wrong on that. We also did receive a great project and great evaluation of our general fund buildings that is going to provide us some framework to try to keep projects moving forward and make sure that we assess the right things correctly as we move through. It does get a little bit more difficult on staff because it would be nice to have this all managed by an outside agency. However, we've got staff in place that can probably cover as much of this as we can, and we can see those energy savings hopefully through the implementation of projects over the next few years and continuing on as we move forward. And as Jason said, I think we're both here to answer any questions you may have.
Council members, questions? Councilmember Gabriel.
Thank you, Mayor. Todd, I was just curious, Jason talked about the CARES money. It would seem to me that cities and counties would be prime candidates for that money, and Jason talked about that we were not able to receive any of that. Can you decipher why?
Honorable Mayor, through you to Councilor Gabriel, I can't really decipher why. As we sat through the kind of the award process as staff, it seemed like most of the impetus of the funding that was available in those areas was put towards hospitals and schools kind of asking for the same funding. And so for some reason, it didn't seem like a lot of cities actually got that, those specific project requests funded. And that's kind of from recollection from past. There is a new round of CARES Act funding coming. However, we've got to be very cautious as a city because we've got a lot of revenue replacement and trying to keep, as we see cuts maybe potentially coming from the state and direct distribution, how that funding is going to help us bridge those gaps also. So I wish I could really say the reason cities weren't funded in those areas, but it just didn't seem that any city really got the approval, although a few of them did have similar requests. None of the cities or counties really got HVAC or investment grade type audit work done or funded through CARES Act.
Okay. Thanks, Todd.
You're welcome.
Council members, other questions for Assistant City Manager or representative from Honeywell, Councilmember O'Doherty?
I know that there'll be a lot of relief packages coming down the pipeline, and will this give us an opportunity to have like shovel-ready things that if money does come from the feds for energy efficiency and all, that we'll be able to jump on it?
Honorable Mayor, through you to Councilor Doherty, I believe it gives us the framework for the startup projects. One that we recently bid out was the replacement of a rooftop unit at the Recreation Center that we utilized the investment grade audit package to provide for the framework to get that done. And the process really did run smooth and go well. Do I believe that we've got good projects, that we have good backing of where they need to be replaced and how they do? Yes. But do we have full shovel ready design? We do not.
Chief Operations Officer Brown, I saw that you had raised your hand. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah,
Hi.
We can hear you, Malia.
Okay. I just wanted to mention, Mayor and Council, that the new Rescue Act plan that is coming up, and we did get money for. I need to meet with the city manager on. There is still really hard restrictions on that money, and the infrastructure is really toward water and sewer, and just, you know, it's not going to be towards this type of project.
Thank you for that additional information. Any help is welcome help, of course, but there's always the details. Other questions for any of our city staff folks? All right. Well, this is a largely kind of a wrap up to a project that we had wanted to get some information on. We appreciate the work that was done. It's unfortunate that some of the obstacles that presented themselves did so, but we still have made some progress on our overall goals, and no doubt we'll have some opportunities to continue to meet those goals in the future. I don't see anyone else seeking recognition. I do see Councilmember Gabriel.
Thank you, Mayor. Jason, a question for you. You talked about carbon reduction measurement in light of the $700,000 energy costs for the city on an annual basis. Can you just give me your opinion on, I can't remember the exact number, but I noted it looked like it was substantial on the carbon reduction. Can you just comment on that a little bit, if you would, please?
I will do my best. I think if you want detailed information, I would refer to the IGA report, and I apologize since we knew we weren't moving forward with this project. It's been a while since I revisited that, but again, I mean, so basically the onus of that calculation is going to now fall on the city, and I think Todd mentioned that when he was speaking last, that, you know, it would be nice to have an entity like Honeywell calculate and measure and verify all of that carbon reduction. So now that will kind of fall on the city to do that calculation if that's something you guys want to do. And, you know, I know they are moving forward with the ECMs that we looked at out at the wastewater treatment plant. So there's definitely going to be energy savings. Will they be guaranteed by Honeywell? No. And, you know, it'll be up to somebody else to really calculate that carbon reduction numbers going forward.
Great,
So,
thank you.
not trying to dodge your question. It's just been a while since I looked at it because, you know, we knew there wasn't going to be a future here on this project. So, but there'd be detailed information on that in the IGA report.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Council members? Councilmember O'Doherty?
Oh, the slide showed 28% of carbon neutral achieved by implementation. So if we could pull off all of these suggestions, we could conceivably, that would be the low hanging fruit. We could probably reduce our carbon emissions by 28% according to the original calculations. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember O'Doherty. Last chance. All right. Before we close this portion of the work session, I would just like to make one quick point for everyone, maybe two. First, I think this is a near-term result for a long-term goal of the city and a series of projects that'll fit into a long-term goal. So this isn't in any way, shape, or form the final word. We've heard a little bit about some setbacks, but I don't think it's in any way, shape, or form determinative of our reaching our goals regarding energy efficiencies and trying to utilize cleaner energy sources. Unless, of course, the future city council is to alter that plan or change that goal, which I don't believe our community would accept. So it's a near-term result for a long-term project that'll be ongoing. All right, we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next section and thank everyone for.
If I could, I just want to thank Jason Randall for being here tonight.
Absolutely, and I was about to add to that as well. Thank you for your time and being here and for your efforts on this project. I hope that your injury recovery goes quickly, and we thank you for your time here tonight. And we'll close this portion of the work session and move on to the next, which is also an item for the Assistant City Manager. And this is a topic regarding downtown initiatives, a recap, an evaluation, and some consideration of 2021 initiatives. Go ahead, Assistant City Manager. Thank you.
Honorable Mayor, City Council, thanks for giving us this opportunity. I hope I don't eat up too much of our time and get to that 9 o'clock deadline, but we'll try to get through this a little bit better than that. When we were talking about this work session a few weeks back, or maybe even a month back, I believe Councilor O'Doherty had indicated that she didn't really like when we talked about COVID safe, because COVID is not really safe. And so I was trying to come up with some way to really frame this presentation and make sure that we were set up correctly. And I just kind of came up with downtown initiatives. My intent tonight is to do a recap and then open it up for questions on the recap, and then do a look forward and open it up for questions on the looking forward section as we go through the process. So if anybody doesn't have any objections to that, we'll just kind of get rolling. I like my new color because, you know, I sit in the dark and my screen's green, so it's making me glow nice. It's something new, a new filter.
Yeah, it's kind of a kryptonite effect or something.
Yeah, yeah. I appreciate that. Sometimes I feel like Superman. So our recap tonight is, we're going to look at kind of Resolution 2020-41, which was the open container area, and Resolution 2020-43, which were the hand sanitizer stations, the sidewalk sales permit, the right-of-way encroachment permit, and the outdoor space activation that we implemented last year during the summer of 2020. It's even gone a little bit beyond that. Resolution 2020-41, if I can remind you, it was the open container area, and it was implemented to support downtown businesses through encouraging more attendance in Laramie's historic downtown. When we passed that resolution, we made it effective July 16th through September 7th. It was Thursday through Saturday from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. It was a limited area, basically from the railroad tracks or First Street to 4th Street, and then from, if I remember correctly, University to Custer, maybe. And those are a guess. There was no glass allowed in the open container. Special event permits were still required to gain the proper permits, but we waived the fee for open container permits during that time. A few things that we did as staff to try to encourage and make it successful. We provided signs around the perimeter of the area that listed the rules and talked about the open container. Kind of made, if you went past it, you would know, hopefully. We also took out staff resource guides that we handed out to all the bars and restaurants throughout downtown. It showed the area, talked about the times, gave an idea of which ones were eligible to participate and at what level they were eligible to participate. Because if you keep in mind a retail liquor license, you were able to serve anything to go outside your doors. A bar and restaurant liquor license, you could not participate in that. If you were a microbrewery or a winery, the product you produce, you could send out the door. But stuff that you might have sold on the side, you couldn't send out. So if you take, let's take Coal Creek, for example. If they sold one of their microbrews, but then they had something else they sold that wasn't one of their products, that secondary product wasn't permitted to go outside their doors. And then we also created signs that we put up throughout the bars and restaurants and throughout the area, as you see there. And the city clerk provided emails to all the restaurant, bar, and liquor licenses to remind them of the open container area. I did check with the chief of police and asked him if there were any enhanced issues related to the open container district. And he said that as he looked back in the records that he had no tickets or anything that could be attributed to the implementation of the open container area, and that he and the police department were fully supportive of all the downtown initiatives, including the open container area, the way it was implemented. Then we'll move on to Resolution 2020-43, which we already talked about, and I'll go through these slides just to try to get us there. I liked using this picture because it was actually a picture of Sweet Melissa's and the Front Street Tavern. And she was one of the first ones to participate in the right-of-way encroachment. And I've got another picture on there of kind of how it turned out. So one of the things we did is we had 12 hand sanitizer stations fabricated and placed throughout the downtown. A little bit about the fabrication: it was provided by a local welder, so we kept that money local. The signs were provided by Star Awards. We kept that money local. And then the dispensing units were free from our supplier, but we do have to purchase the product, which we did purchase enough product that I was out just the other day and checked them. They're all still working. We did have 2 vandalized that were removed from the system. My staff intends to repair those and get them back up this spring. We just had a super busy summer last year. That was the hand sanitizer station. You know, I'm partial to it because it was part of my projects, but I think they were attractive, and I think they actually added to downtown. We used the colors from that you see around downtown, and we spread them around. And when I was out at the Hollyhock parking lot the other day, I actually used the one and felt a little safer because I used the hand sanitizer. The LMSA managed the sidewalk sales permit, and basically what we did there is we created a blanket sidewalk sale permit to LMSA, and then the downtown businesses that wanted to participate in the sidewalk sale were able to work with LMSA through no fees. Simple rules were attributed to it. You have to have a 5-foot clear path from the door to the street, and you have to have a 5-foot clear path along the property. That could be the middle, that could be up next to the building, it could be out at the edge of the sidewalk, but that was for fire travel so that people could get through. And then they indicated, and Jennifer Powers on the line with us tonight too, that they had 23 retailers that participated in the program throughout last year. Oh, if I talked about some of the things that were neat about the sidewalk sale, is what it was intended to do was provide consumer confidence, that you could go and purchase stuff without maybe being inside a store. You could stay outside. I think that it adds to some vibrancy to the outdoors also. The right-of-way encroachment permit, and we had a liaison team, which was Sarah Reese, who worked for us formerly, Nancy Bartholomew, and myself. And we're not saying that we created the best friends within the city, because we did sometimes overpromise and maybe force some of our engineering guys into a position that they didn't want to be in. But we all worked it out, and we actually got to a point where we had good implementations downtown. We have a great relationship with engineering and how they passed public works and how we got all these in place. It was just kind of a fun process to get through, and actually has improved some of our downtown areas. We had 2 permanent installations, one of which you see there, which was Sweet Melissa's. That picture was actually taken about 3 weeks ago on a sunny, warm day. Some folks were sitting outside, eating their meal outside, sitting in a short sleeve shirt. It was that nice on her side of the building. We also had Roxy's on Grand that was able to construct hers on both 3rd Street and Grand Avenue. We had 2 temporary installations, the Altitude Chop House and Brewery and the Sugar Mouse. And the Altitude Chop House and Brewery actually intends to create a permanent space for 2021. I did include a quote there from Melissa Murphy, and it might be a little small for, I'm going to put my screen down so I can read it. She had stated that outdoor dining was a definite help for her business. People who were uncomfortable with indoor dining could still have a restaurant experience. It allowed them to increase. Oh.
Go ahead and just keep reading. Todd? We'll give him a minute.
Let me see. Did I get unmuted? Can you hear me?
You're back with us now.
Sorry about that. And they do plan on using it again this year for all the benefits. And she also stated in there that she said, in general, seemed more vibrant, alive downtown due to what they were doing. So that was kind of nice to hear from Melissa. The final part of that was our outdoor space activation. And if you remember correctly, we added 4 tables at First Street Plaza that included umbrellas and a restaurant sign that gave you an idea of where you could get carry out or order ahead. And those were temporary additions. We also did the Hollyhock Plaza, which was the addition of turf, planters, flowers, 8 6-person tables, umbrellas, and a downtown restaurant sign, both of which were temporary at the time. And I've got a few pictures here for you. That's First Street Plaza from a couple different angles. You know, those are right after we set the tables and did some stuff, but when I participated down there, I did see folks using it. And then this is Hollyhock Commons, some visual of it that you can see. And again, I'm partial to it. I think it turned out. I think it was a beautiful space, but it was, in my mind, it was well used. And at that point, I'd like to stop and set up for questions, comments, and discussion on a recap.
Thanks a lot. Council members, that's your cue for questions about any of that. There was a lot there. Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Assistant City Manager, I am curious if one thing that I noticed this summer, I used both the First Street Plaza and Hollyhock Commons often to have a meal or something outdoors in the safest way possible. And one thing that I had noticed was that there was a lot of recyclables that were given out because everything was, because you could take a beer with you somewhere or something of the sort. I'm curious if there is any ability from the city to include any recycling bins in the downtown if we move forward, certainly with the open container district, as most of that alcohol or other to-go items is served in a plastic cup. So long as they end up as plastics 1 and 2, if those could be included in, or if we could include recycling bins so that those aren't just going straight to the landfill.
Honorable Mayor, through you to Councilor Harrington, I would make one statement and then see if Brooks wanted to add to it. But oftentimes what we find in the recycling realm is when you do public-centered recycling, you end up with lots of contamination in the areas. And that's very difficult for staff to deal with and does cause us some issues on our recycling. We actually did talk about that last year, putting recycling down there, and Brooks and Vic and JR at Solid Waste all kind of clued me into the, you end up with just so much contamination. Pizza boxes, everybody thinks pizza boxes are recyclable when really they're typically not because of the grease and the oils and the manufacturing style of the pizza boxes. And it gets very difficult to do that. So, Brooks, did you want to add anything to that?
Honorable Mayor, City Council, I think Todd nailed it right on the head. We've actually tried recycling containers downtown many times, during different events, during Jubilee days, and then just throughout the summer. And 90% of that material ends up getting just dumped. We end up with so much contamination in there, mostly from food, that it's not even worth our guys having to go through and sort that out. So our experience in the past is that there's just so much contamination in those that it's not worth it. Like Todd said, we did discuss it this year and thought about doing it. But again, the past issues we've had, it's just, to send an extra guy down in an extra truck and then try to sort through that stuff really just wasn't worth it. We even in the past, we got containers that had the smaller holes on top to try to limit the amount of waste that could be put in there. But man, it's amazing the type of stuff that fits through that hole. You'd be surprised.
Thanks, Brooks. And if I could, I'd ask you to hang out for just a second because I think Councilmember Harrington has some follow-up, and then I'm going to go to Councilmember O'Doherty. Follow-up, Councilmember Harrington, or different topic?
Yeah, it's a follow-up, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Brooks, I'm glad you mentioned the small hole. As is typical, when I have an idea, staff is already well ahead of me. So that was one of my follow-up questions is if we could have specific to like cups, as knowing that that's going to be a huge source of potential recyclables. If we could have a specific to plastic cups recycling idea. The other I will just throw out for thought to staff. I know we aren't going to include glass if we move forward with an open container district, but I would wonder about maybe a partnership with LMSA to have some sort of reusable cup that could be used for downtown. If we had metal cups or something of the sort that would be allowed that the police department could, easily identify as the open container district container. So if we could maybe find a way to reduce some of that waste, because I think, Brooks, you're probably acutely aware of how full our trash cans were all summer downtown. If we could find a way to eliminate some of that, I think it would be beneficial, certainly given the previous work session topic. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yep, you bet. Thanks. Councilmember O'Doherty.
I recall from our contract with Waste Management, cups are not even recyclable. It says they have to accept a screw cap. So 1 and 2 plastic that can accept a screw cap. So we already, I'm pretty sure we can't even recycle cups, which is one of my great frustrations in life. So I like the metal idea. Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else? Especially anything for Mr. Webb before we let him go? Councilmember Gabriel.
Not for Brooks. I think, Todd, what you mentioned concerning open container and no issues from the police chief was significant because I had heard a lot of people talking about, oh my gosh, we're going to have all kinds of problems. And not having any issues, I think, is something to talk about.
Thanks. I wish I could say more about that. All he told me is they didn't have anything that they could attribute directly to this. There could very well be vandalism happen in the downtown, but if it happens at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. or 11 p.m., I don't know that you can attribute that directly to any open container activities. And, quite frankly, I saw lots of people that participated, and it sure seemed like everybody participated in a reasonable fashion.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Any other questions on this item before we go to the public? I know there was a lot of things covered. I'll mention one issue that comes to mind for me, which is that if we follow through with some of these programs, it's very likely that there will be a Jubilee Days this year, and there might be some crossover concerns that we'll want to plan carefully for. And maybe those aren't serious, but there might be some overlap there that we'll want to figure out how we want to work through or work with. I don't know that we've had a decision made about that yet, but I imagine we'll know relatively soon if it'd be a Jubilee Days. Go ahead, Assistant City Manager.
In tune with that, Honorable Mayor, I was actually contacted by the Jubilee Days about expanding the size of the open container area during Jubilee Days. I indicated that although I'm not really opposed to that would be a council decision if that was deemed necessary. But they are at least doing some work forward on Jubilee Days. So.
All right. With regard to that, I would probably advise that the Jubilee Days Committee follow up with the downtown business owners about what they envision for that before bringing it back for us to make a decision, because I think they're going to have the most to say about it, honestly. But we'll look forward to more discussion about that. Let's go ahead and turn it over to members of the public. Whoops. And see if we have folks that want to ask questions or share views. I see that we've got Mr. Glass raising his hand. I'm going to check and make sure from the city clerk that we don't have anyone that had signed up also. We'll go ahead and recognize Mr. Glass, but all right. Mr. Glass, you've got the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I want to start out with something positive. I do think that authorizing sidewalk sales was a very positive and good thing to do. And one thing that council might consider is passing an ordinance that makes that possible without a permit within certain constraints, so that people didn't have to ask Mother May I before they decided, oh, this is a nice day, I would like to put some merchandise out. Some of the other initiatives didn't work as well. The hand sanitizer stations were vandalized, as was mentioned, and were basically useless because, as it turned out, COVID-19 is rarely, if ever, spread by touch. They mainly just became obstacles. That's something that I'd say was not effective and should not be repeated. The closure of the parking lots did impact us, even though our own building was a block and a half away, down the block and around the corner. We still saw people circling because they couldn't park in the lot that was commandeered as what they called the Hollyhock Commons. Please, in the future, again, avoid taking away parking from the downtown area. There were businesses with employees there who needed to park, who just couldn't find places to park. As for the open container ordinance, well, when adults consume alcohol, they begin to act like children and need adult supervision, as any bar owner will tell you. Allowing open containers causes problems because you can't really supervise them. And as a result, we saw many downtown businesses posting signs saying, please don't come in here with the beverages that you're carrying around. I saw them on most of the doors of the retail outlets. And so I think we should be very concerned about doing this. I don't think we should start allowing open containers in downtown on a regular basis. It's difficult enough to control it. And the other thing is, there wasn't any outreach about the results. Yes, it's true that maybe a lot of people didn't call the cops, but I really think that it behooves the city staff, and again, Laramie Main Street, which seems to operate independently of downtown and without outreach, should reach out to businesses and ask about their experiences, because again, we saw a lot of people who apparently had concerns about this. And As for the encroachment on the sidewalks for other purposes, the right-of-way encroachment, as they're calling it, that worked out except for two problems. First of all, it became difficult to avoid smokers. And a lot of us whose lungs don't like cigarette smoke are having trouble doing that. Of course, so some of the people who were smoking in those areas were technically violating the city's clean air ordinance. But more than that, it gets very difficult to navigate around that. So we may want to do something to address that problem. And the other thing is, well, during COVID-19, it's a good idea to maintain a business, at least some distance from people, even outdoors. And that became impossible when the encroachments got too big. You literally had to brush against people as you went down the sidewalk because of the encroachments. So again, I'd like to see that problem addressed as we go through another summer. Hopefully, the pandemic will subside by mid to late summer if we get enough people vaccinated. But it's still a concern. I still think that that council and the city staff should address those things. And well, that's what I have to say. This is my feedback. I hope that you will solicit feedback from other people as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glass. Appreciate your taking time out of your evening to join us and share your perspective. Other members of the public that would like to make a comment, or we might even go for a few questions. I don't see any other hands. Thank you, City Clerk. All right, we'll close public comment on that and go to the council for any follow-up discussion. All right, Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the things that was just noted, I just needed a little clarification because I might be misremembering. My understanding of the open container district is that beverages were not actually allowed to be carried inside of any store. Is that the case, Assistant City Manager?
Honorable Mayor, through you to Councilor Harrington, that's actually not the case. It was the store's discretion.
Okay.
So if the store didn't want people to bring it in, then they put up a sign that they didn't want them to bring it in. If the store did allow people to bring them in, then people could bring their open containers into the stores.
Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
You bet. Councilmember Cumby.
I just wanted to comment that as a nurse, sometimes I'm vigilant to certain health practices, and I noted, I was actually surprised at how frequently I saw people using the hand sanitizers. At first, I wondered if it was actually a good idea or if people would use it. And I took interest in that, and I was surprised at the amount of use, especially the one in front of the co-op. People use it all the time. I guess, Todd, you would know by how much you had to replace the contents.
And Honorable Mayor, through you to Councilor Cumby, is I believe we only had to replace the contents in two of the dispensers, the one by Hollyhock and the one by Co-op so far. There's something like 1,300 squirts in each bag. So there's a lot of squirts in those bags, and my facilities maintenance guys make a trip through there to make sure they're working as they need to.
It's my understanding that regular disinfection of hands is an excellent public health measure to have in place in general. I certainly can't speak to its efficacy on any particular pathogens, but I think it's recognized generally as a quality public health measure. I see some other people have turned their cameras up. Councilmember Cumby, is that a follow-up before I move on? Okay, and then I'll go to you, Councilmember Stalder.
We do know that influenza virus is spread by hands, and with the measures that we have been enacted, social distancing, mask, and hand sanitization, influenza has dropped dramatically this year. So just wanted to add that comment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, you bet. Thank you, Councilmember Cumby. Yeah, I think that probably by and large, hand sanitizing stations have been positively received. And given that we've already made the investment, I don't know why we wouldn't continue to encourage people to have clean hands. Councilmember Stalder?
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on Councilmember Cumby's comment with an unofficial observation, also as a nurse, that you can't see somebody walk by a hand sanitizer station and use it without being like, oh, I should use a hand sanitizer station. You know, I see that in hospitals and all kinds of healthcare settings, and I've seen it downtown as well. So I think, you know, it's just sort of instinctual when you see someone else use it that you also use it, and that's great. I think the hand sanitizer stations are awesome.
Thank you, Councilmember Stalder. So it sounds like 10 out of 10 nurses and moms agree hand sanitizing stations, probably a good idea. Any other comments for Assistant City Manager Fieser, other staff members on this? Councilmember Cumby.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Fieser, I would just say if there were some stations where the contents were not diminishing significantly, then we might just consider moving them.
Yeah. Honorable Mayor, through you to Councilor Cumby, we can certainly look into that. I guess we're kind of leading into stuff that's in the next part of the proposal, which is looking forward. If you guys want to jump into that and see where we go. Yeah,
let's do that, because that was going to be the basis of my question. So let's just see about what's coming up next.
You know, really, at this point, it's a matter of looking forward and what does this council really want us to move forward with as staff is what I was hoping to get out of tonight's presentation. We've got those 5 initiatives that we've talked about, and basically what I've done is taken each one and put out there some thoughts for counselors to think about and to give us some ideas about where we go from here. If we talk about the open container area, there's items to discuss. First and foremost, would City Council want to move forward with this item? We need to establish some dates, some days, some times. Consistency to me in anything when you do something like this is key, because if you do consistency, you can reduce your expense of implementing. Like last year, I made a mistake and I dated the signs. And I would rather try to get to something that's a little more general, so each year we don't have the expense of replacing that date on the signs. So that's going to take me a little bit of time to get through. Did I lose my screen share? Nancy, are you driving for me?
Yeah.
And then, you know, to keep in note, when you talk about the open container area, the farmers market runs June 25th through September 24th. So would there be a reason to keep it consistent with the dates of the farmers market? I think that's all stuff to talk about as we go through with City Council. Nancy, if you give us the next slide. The free hand sanitizer stations, I think we've talked about this already, is that washing and disinfecting the hands is high on the prevention of communicable disease. The neat thing about that is it is optional, and I do, when I see somebody walk by it, I probably have that same thing. Well, why didn't they sanitize their hands? But that's the way it goes. And like we said, you know, 2 out of 12, they weren't destroyed completely, but they were pushed out of the ground, which surprised me that somebody could replace those, because I did that with staff, and I thought we put them in pretty well. But they weren't completely destroyed. We just have to replace one dispensing unit, which is, again, a free product, and we need to get them reinstalled. If you go on to the next slide, Nancy. The LMSA sidewalk sales permit, if we decide to go forward with that, I do appreciate Mr. Glass's comment about passing an ordinance to make it allowable. I think that would have to be vetted as far as what kind of insurance does it take, what would we need to do. But, you know, expands retail area, decreases store congestion, can lead to increased sales, can improve consumer confidence, reduces city staff time by having the LMSA take on those individual calls. And again, that's optional. If a business doesn't want to participate in it, it's optional. And Nancy, if you go on to the next slide. The right-of-way encroachment liaison team, I don't know that we actually need to have the right-of-way encroachment liaison team in place anymore. Engineering actually does a fine job. I think it was just a matter of people realizing that they had a place to go to get this done. It does expand potential sales. It, again, reduces congestion. In the words of Melissa Murphy, it adds vibrancy to downtown. And really, I think it's a nice addition, and it's nice to see people out enjoying the nice weather when they can. Outdoor space activation, the First Street Plaza, we do have a few things that we've done over the winter. I'm not sure how many people have seen the lighting project that we put down there. Has anybody been down there at night and seen it lit up? super excited about how that got put together. It was funded mainly through LMSA. The city did contribute in. We did the manpower and bought the cabling and did the concrete to put the poles in. But that certainly activates that space much later into the evenings, which I appreciate very much. One of the other things is we're looking to maybe automate the fire pit. That picture that you see of the fire pit is actually from down in Centerra. And it's basically got a safety cage over it, and their fire pits are automated, so we're going to try to do that and make it safer and make it run a little bit more often so people can count on it and actually enjoy that space and make it more activated. If you go on to the next slide, Nance. The next one, Hollyhock Commons, we did save all the items for reuse except for the annual flowers. I think I'm using that term correctly. But, if you think about that lot, the planters were provided by Centennial Woods. The flowers were provided by Windmill Hill Greenhouse. The lumber was provided from Blowdorn Lumber. The carpet bars I bought at Carpet One. The turf I had to order online, and the umbrellas we ordered online. But we really did keep most of that money here local. And all those items are available for reuse in this next year. We do have pavement improvements that are needed in the Hollyhock parking lot. And I did get a proposal from Simon Contractors, and it's $24,000 to mill and overlay that parking lot, which really is on the city's maintenance anyway, which would need to be done. And it does take some staff time, because keep in mind that on Monday mornings, I had staff go around and pick up trash, and every day of the week during the day, staff went down and wiped the tables and kind of rearranged things to make sure it was ready for the next day. And I also had staff water the plants. So with that being said, we can have some discussion around a look forward. And what I really would like to see is some direction from council on where they'd like us to go from here if we can.
Let's open it up. Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to put my 2 cents in, Todd, my opinion would be to move forward with all of the projects that we embarked on last summer. I think a lot of the sunk costs are already there. And I think there are members of the public that we should keep in mind their comments, but I think largely what I have heard about projects like Hollyhock Commons and the sort of the way in which we repurpose some of First Street Plaza, the right-of-way encroachments, I think largely I have heard optimistic feedback. I think mostly it's positive. I do think that there are considerations to be made, but I think it's, I think our recovery from COVID is largely going to happen in public spaces. It's going to be these outside spaces where we can gather more safely that are going to ease us all back into a year of being very isolated back into a more community-centered way of life, which is why we all love living here. So I think my 2 cents is really I would like to move forward with all of these programs once again. And I guess just for a little specificity, I think pairing the open container district to the farmers market makes a lot of sense.
Not me. I want to stay at home forever and ever. Council Member O'Doherty.
I agree. I like all these initiatives. I know we get pushback about parking, but in summer, more people are riding their bikes and walking, and we should be walking in our beautiful summers. And so I think, sacrificing a few parking spaces is worth it, because when you think about it, a car usually has 1 or 2 people in it. You could use that space for a lot of people spread out if they're not in cars. So I don't begrudge the parking spaces, and I like all these ideas. Thanks.
Alternatively, I think, Todd, you have discussed with the council, and I'll recognize council members in just a moment. Sorry, follow up. There are some options for expanded parking down there, and I know you've touched on that a little bit. I'm thinking about what we might do with, I'll say it again, the Clark Street area. I'd like to hear more about that, and I might like to hear more about that before I vote on summer projects the next time, because I think it could alleviate some of these parking concerns. But I'll wait to hear back more from the staff. Maybe it's not ready just yet. Councilmember Cumby.
I just want to say I am also in support of these 5 initiatives. And when I was downtown this summer, I found the Hollyhocks Commons area to be highly utilized, and that people would get food and entire families would be eating and enjoying the space. One thing I would like to pursue, though, is the idea of reusable cups. And my thought was something like they have at the UW Theater when you go there and get beer or wine. And we use those cups all the time, put them in our camping boxes. They're great cups. And something where we had our logo on them. You could purchase them at the park, possibly an initiative, 5% off on your drink, or if you're not using cups, but that we could begin some sort of an initiative to have cups that would have our logo so that people leave with our logo, and that we're recycling and that we engage our downtown partners. And the last thing I wanted to say is that I get a significant amount of email and a number of calls from our citizens when they have a complaint or an issue. It seems like there's a vast number that feel free to communicate with council. And so I would think that people in the downtown area, if there were some significant issues related to open container, that we would have heard from something, because I'm finding people don't suffer in silence. So that would be my last comment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Cumby. I think that is a very, very, very good point. And it might be good for the city, for organizations like Main Street who try to focus on downtown, to find ways to channel positive feedback. Because who we do hear from are people that are dissatisfied, always at the city government level, and that's as it should be. But you also don't have the reverse effect. When people like something, they typically just enjoy it and move on with their lives. They're not necessarily interested in spending time, and that sometimes leaves us as the local elected officials in a somewhat odd position in terms of making decisions. So that might be something to incorporate, is making sure that we get well-rounded feedback, both from, particularly from people that are unhappy or have criticisms or suggestions for improvement, but also for people that are generally supportive of these things. Because speaking personally as a member of this council, in a kind of roundabout way, I feel people support these things and approve of them and want to see more of them. But I don't necessarily get that channeled feedback that I'd like before I make a decision one way or the other. And Todd, that Assistant City Manager Feeser, that isn't necessarily directed solely at you. It's also directed to folks at Main Street in terms of that communication between downtown businesses and among downtown businesses and your office and the City Council. Appreciate your patience, council members. Councilmember Gabriel, I know you've been waiting. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Mayor. Just like to echo the sentiments of the other councilors. I'm on board with all of this. Kudos to Todd and his staff, Laramie Main Street. I think we're on the right track, trying to move Laramie forward a little bit. I like the parklets idea. We're not sitting back doing nothing. We're trying to be positive, generate a little business downtown. And I have heard nothing but positive comments on, well, maybe one or two on the Hollyhock comments that were a little negative. But other than that, I think, we got to do stuff that promotes downtown. And I think we're on the right track there. So Good job, Todd, your staff, Laramie Main Street. Let's keep moving forward.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Gabriel. Other council members want to share something
Honorable
here?
Mayor, could I throw something in real quick?
You bet, and then I'll go to Councilmember Schuster. Go ahead, Assistant City Manager.
I did want to let you know that yesterday I did take the initiative to email some of the folks that had some complaints that this would be going on tonight, which you probably saw in one of your council emails. So I did take the initiative to approach people that I knew had opposition to this so that they knew it would be discussed tonight, just because I think it was only fair so it wasn't snuck up on anybody.
I appreciate that, and let's keep up those genuine efforts at incorporating all of the feedback on these things before we make our decisions, and I really appreciate those efforts. Councilmember Schuster, thank you for your patience. Go ahead.
Thank you. If we see that Jubilee Days is going to be a go with the downtown activities, I would really like to see the Clark Street striping with the parking in the middle, because I'd love to see us add some parking during that time, because Jubilee Days takes about 8 blocks out from their center, and that would be nice if we could add another 40 spots down there on that road or something like that if we allow parking in the center. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Schuster. Assistant City Manager, you heard it. There's some more support for trying to see what we can do about that Clark Street. Even if we can't get the striping done, if we could get something done on a temporary basis to coincide with these events, to utilize that as a parking area, maybe that might even be an option. Other council comments on this? Okay, Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had one more question, if I could. I know we're in conference, but if I could ask one question of the Assistant City Manager. Is there any consideration for, I know you and I had talked in the past about the potential for some repairs in the Hollyhock Commons parking lot. And I was wondering if any of those were necessary ahead of this year. I certainly think it would be worth getting them done as soon as we can, if they are. I know some repairs were done last summer. And I didn't hear any complaints about the condition of the parking lot underneath the turf. So it's not a huge thing, but I had the question, so I wanted to just ask you while we have you here.
Honorable Mayor, through you to Councilor Harrington, I actually did get a proposal from Simon Contractors, just preliminary, to see what it would take to overlay the parking lot. And keep in mind that I did this based on our parking lot replacement code. I'm not planning to impact more of this to require extended landscaping. So the city is following its own code also as we move through this, just as a note. But the proposal that I did receive from Simon, I'm going to just kick it open so I can see what I got. $26,925 to mill and overlay 2 inches, which would take care of all of what we need to do. So what I would really propose is, if we do implement Hollyhock, because the weather doesn't really get super nice here till the end of June, that we potentially look at, I'm trying to get my screen to close up for some reason. I can't get it to do it. Would propose that we actually start around the time of the farmer's market. So that would give us a month to hopefully get that parking lot milled and overlaid and improved for use beyond just Hollyhock. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Anybody have anything
That's
else?
great, Todd. Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
No, that's all right. Anything else, Councilmember Harrington? All right. Anybody else on that? Appreciate that information and those questions. Once again, I would just make a pitch for well-rounded feedback and maybe incorporating that into whatever improvements we might make. And maybe, we'll have a discussion about that before we move forward at a voting council meeting about which way and what times we might go with this summer. Really appreciate. Yeah, go ahead.
If I could, back to Councilor Harrington's, as I was thinking about it, the setup and that I spent a little bit of time down at Hollyhock myself and never heard any complaints about the undersurface, but for us as a maintenance work, we worked hard to make sure those carpet bars stayed down and stayed tight. And that's where the problem is, because they were actually screwed into the pavement. And as the pavement is alligatored, if your screw hit one of those alligators, it would never hold down. And that's what I'm really looking to prevent in the future. Plus, with a new surface, I could actually get away with less smaller screw causing less damage as we go through. So that's really what I'm hoping to accomplish out of potentially trying to get that parking lot resurfaced.
All right. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Let's close this portion of the work session. And Todd, you did well on time, kept that right where we'd want it. Let's go to the city council updates and council comments. And, you know, we'll just do the usual round robin, except in this case, probably just whoever's quickest on the draw with a hand up for an update. Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It took me a little longer to get unmuted than I expected. So Planning Commission met Monday, yesterday. They approved a conditional use permit for a daycare on South 8th Street, just a couple blocks south of the Civic Center. And then they also approved a preliminary plat for the new transportation hub for the University of Wyoming, which is on South 15th Street, right next to sort of Bill Nye, where the old car dealership was. The tourism coalition that I have been co-chairing through the Thrive plan and with Scott Larson from the tourism board. They had their final meeting, and Todd is also on that very actively as well. The final meeting was this week, and so they will be basically compiling a list of what was learned through this process. It involved 30-some stakeholders in the tourism and cultural parts of Laramie. So I think a lot of those recommendations will be no surprise to all of you. There are a few that I thought were pretty unique ideas that came out through the process that I'm really looking forward to sharing with you all. It's a lot of actionable things that really get that Thrive plan, the tourism section of the Thrive plan, moving forward and getting into those action stages. And a lot of them are geared at being in play before the summer, so that we are planning ahead for another large push of tourism and outdoor recreation that we saw this previous summer. And then one final piece, you'll see a grant application headed your way sometime in the next few meetings, and Todd might be able to give you a specific date, but that is for a second year. The Laramie Public Art Coalition would like to submit a grant with our approval for a Bloomberg Foundation Asphalt Art Initiative grant. So that's basically a placemaking grant by putting a mural onto asphalt. So just keep an eye out for that coming at one of our upcoming business meetings. And thanks for humoring me, Mr. Mayor. That is all my updates.
No, that's good for the council. Thank you, Councilmember Harrington. Council members, Councilmember Schuster.
Okay, Historical Railroad Depot met last week. We are down in rentals by about 80%, like a lot of other people that have public gathering spots. Wyoming Territorial Park is next Monday. They have some really great ideas going. They hope to, by end of summer, which will be nice, having a second sanitary dump space for RV, and we're going to look to automate it, because we have a lot of people we don't think probably do the honor box thing. So we'll be going with that. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Councilmember Schuster. Thank you very much. Councilmember Gabriel.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of the Tourism Board could not meet this month because of lots of different conflicts, and so we just canceled the Tourism Board for this month. Our working group on the Casper Aquifer met yesterday, myself along with Councilors Cumby and O'Doherty, County Commissioner Ibarra, This is our third meeting, fourth coming up next week. Very positive so far. We had a good meeting yesterday, presentation from Darren and David Gertz from City and County on that plan that council members saw, I believe, last fall. Just an overview of the history and where we're going forward on the aquifer. And so we're very pleased with the way things are going. We need to get something accomplished with the county, and I think Commissioner Ibarra is willing to do that. And so, of course, we need the entire county commission to agree, not totally, but two out of the three anyway. So we're moving forward, and I feel really good about it. I don't know if Councilors O'Doherty and Cumbie want to add anything further on our working group, but I feel very good about it.
Thank you, Councilmember Gabriel, and they can add when they give their updates on their other committees. I really appreciate that update and those comments, Councilmember Gabriel. Okay, moving around. Councilmember Cumbie.
Update on the Board of Health. We have been unable to meet this year, this quarter, due to a lack of quorum. Councilor Pierce and I have done a couple of interviews for one position and have a viable candidate, and we're clarifying some of the rules and regs, etc. The one thing that is holding up the progress of the Board of Health is that we have not received or been able to find an MD or DO who has volunteered or has expressed any willingness to serve. And so I will be meeting with the city attorney to see if there's any wiggle room in the state statute to fill that position with another qualified applicant, such as would have a doctorate, or we're continue to have a Board of Health that does a position filled. So, sir, please contact us and we will reach out to them. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Cumbie. Something that occurs to me is that might be something to reach out to the Wyoming Medical Association and local chapter affiliates about that concern, about the inability of local boards of health to operate without that individual as a member of the board.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that's an excellent idea, and I will follow up on that. And they may have some clout in the community. They may have some suggestions for someone. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And it just occurs to me that folks that are willing to volunteer their time in associations and things of that nature may have a window into that for us. Council members, other updates? Councilmember O'Doherty.
The National League of Cities, we heard about a lot of initiatives that will be coming down. And so that's why I was asking about kinds of shovel-ready projects. So I think it's just something we need to keep in mind. Traffic Commission lost a member, and so now they don't have a quorum. And so we have a similar situation as the health group. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember O'Doherty. Yep, we need to get these positions filled on these boards and commissions. They do make recommendations that we are tasked with paying attention to. I know you're all working on it. People come and go also. We have to recognize that. Other updates, council members? If you don't have any, that's all right. Councilmember Somerville, I don't want to leave you unrecognized. If you have an update, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do not have any updates to share tonight.
Okay, just checking with you. Vice Mayor Pierce?
No, I'm good for now. Thanks.
All right. Comments? I have several that are sort of update and comment, but I want to give other people a chance. All right. By what comment without alluding to any kind of policy position, yesterday in a very close by community that I would guess we all probably have friends and family members, acquaintances at least, living in, there was another public shooting incident in which 10 people lost their lives, one of whom was a police officer for the Boulder Police Department. And it's something that when it happens that close to home feels like needs to be acknowledged, and that we simply recognize that these kinds of events are all too frequent, and there is no such thing as being protected or isolated from them. And the loss of lives of both public servants, public employees, and people in general is terrible. And we feel for all of those folks and for that community. It's awfully close at hand, and it's very, very unfortunate, and seems appropriate simply to acknowledge that and express that that acknowledgement and that sorrow for folks in Boulder who are not far. I certainly have many, many friends that live right there, and it's just an awful thing. And I appreciate the council allowing for just a moment to acknowledge that. It's not all that often that we have things that close by. By way of update, I'd like to let you know that the legislation that we've been concerned with and spent some time as a council talking about regarding the University of Wyoming water well for irrigation and water system continues to work its way through the Wyoming legislature. It has passed the House of Representatives with a significant debate and a close vote on all three readings of that legislation, and will now be moving over to the other chamber. I would like members of the council to know that in my attendance at the committee meetings and also listening into the discussion in the House, there has been a persistent amount of a persistent effort to share inaccurate information. And if you observe those, I think you'd agree. And outside of trying to provide correct information to our representatives, I'm not sure what else is appropriate. This being Wyoming, some of us may know representatives from other areas that we feel comfortable communicating to, and I'd encourage you to do that, because it's unfortunate to see a decision like that we have some serious concerns about for a variety of reasons being made by our colleagues, other local elected officials, when the information that they have may not be 100% accurate, and in some cases is completely inaccurate. But that process continues, and unless I hear otherwise from you folks, I'll continue to attend meetings where it's appropriate to give testimony and simply try to say, well, here's the situation as we understand it, and our position is we would very much like to work something out. We're not sure that that this bill is it. In fact, we're pretty sure that it's not, and simply just make it known that we're available to come to an agreement with the University of Wyoming, as long as that's an option that we have. Just a moment. My phone seems to be ringing. I don't know why. Because I get telemarketing calls at 8:30 at night, probably like the rest of you. Anyway, that's a little bit of an update. There's also a couple of other pieces of legislation that organizations like the State Planning Association of Planners, City and Community Planners, are opposing because of the impacts that it has on communities. I believe it's House Bill 157 that you may want to go take a look at, because it's very likely to have an impact on future City of Laramie planning and discussions. That is not the only piece of legislation that you might want to take a look at. There are a few others. I'm not going to go through all of them. I will say that our legislative delegation has been pretty good about trying to stay in touch with them, and I think that we can feel good about the job they're trying to do on behalf of the constituents that we share with them, by and large. But those are some things that occurred over the course of last week and early this week that I wanted to keep you all apprised of. So we will have more to talk about, I think, in the near future on those things. In terms of committee meetings, I have one coming up in early April and have not had any on the regular city council committees recently, so no updates there. Vice Mayor, I saw that you had raised your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think it's 158.
That's another one. That's another one. Yeah. That's a Senate File 158 and House Bill 157. Both of those have an impact on city planning and future growth. I'd recommend you take a look at them. If you have an opinion, contact members of the state legislature. I will also share this by way of a comment. I was somewhat shocked to hear some confirmation of what I've always perceived to be a negative opinion about the city of Laramie shared quite openly today in the House chamber. I don't know what to tell you folks, but if you've ever had a feeling that the city of Laramie is not a celebrated entity amongst many members of the legislature, you are correct. Some of that perhaps we bear responsibility for, but I would say that responsibility is only earned by way of representing what our constituents believe and feel. So that's it for that soapbox. Anyone else on anything? Any staff members with any updates or announcements they want to make tonight? Okay. Any other comments? Oh, Councilmember Gabriel, please.
I just wanted to pass along that serving on city boards and city council is good for your health. I ran into Dr. Jerry Meyer the other day going into co-library, 101 years old. And he was a longtime member of the airport board, served on city council. Asked him what was going on. He said, well, I'm going into the library to find out. And I asked him if he still jogged around Jacoby Golf Course when he can. He does, when weather permits, at 101. And it was just great to see him and his enthusiasm for life. And I just wanted to pass that along. Great man.
Councilmember Gabriel, you're always good for a positive comment. That's great. You know, that man has had an incredible footprint on public policy locally here in Laramie and been active in many things for a long, long time. And I think you're right. I think being involved can be, although stressful at times, good for your health. And we need people to sign up and help us out on these boards and commissions. Thank you for that, Councilmember Gabriel. I think we all appreciate it. Anything else, folks, before we do a very quick agenda review for an agenda that only has 2 items on it? I know we're probably all anxious to close the work session. If you want to just take a moment, you'll see what's on the agenda for the special meeting on the 30th, which will be on the next Tuesday. Council members, it's my feeling that what we should do with that meeting for the most part is allow for public comment. Is that where most of you are with that? Councilmember Schuster, please.
I think that we discussed that between 6 and 6:30, we were going to do open topic on anything, and I did not see that on there.
Thank you, Councilmember Schuster. I think there is a time. That's correct, Councilmember Schuster. We were going to have a time there for public comment on any item. And I thought I had seen a version of this that had that. City Clerk, am I just mistaken?
Mr. Mayor, it is built into the template for that meeting. We do have it placed on there. If you'd like me to republish the notice with notice of public comment on non-agenda related items, I can certainly republish.
I'll leave that to the council to give you an affirmative on, but I'm seeing that. I think we want people to know that they're welcome to also show up and provide public comment on any other item.
Okay.
Thank you, City Clerk. Appreciate that. And I understand very well what you're saying. There's a standard template and it was going to be on there, but we probably want people to know ahead of time also if they happen to check. So, Councilmember Schuster, we'll have an open-ended public comment period on there, and we'll get that updated this week so that people have time to check. But anybody disagree with my intentions to largely set aside most of that meeting for public comment, both on the topic at hand as well as in general? I think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to give people that avenue to tell us what they think. Okay. Great. I'm sure that we'll get a lot of it. And that's okay. That's why we're doing it. All right. I'm going to move on to the public comments section for the last part of our work session. And I'm going to recognize Judy Stoke. Her hand is up. Welcome, Ms. Stoke. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and City Council. I just want to echo what Pat said about Jerry Meyer. That man is truly amazing. And if the city has not recently applauded him, I think it's time to do it again. So that's my public comment, is hear, hear for Jerry.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's almost like we need to consider having a Jerry Meyer
Yes.
proclamation.
Yes.
Something along those lines. We'll keep that in mind. He's a significant person for our community.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other comments? I don't see anyone raising their hand. To see a few people there, but no other hands up. Okay. Well, members, I think we have made it through a work session and been able to consider all those items and get good updates. So I appreciate your time tonight, and I'm going to close this work session.